Hello everybody and welcome to the start of our amazing webinar series we have for you this week. So to kick things off we have Paul Gerard, who has been a very important member of EuroSTAR over the last number of years. He's been Program Chair for EuroSTAR in 2014 in Dublin, and he's also won the Testing Excellence Award in 2010 in Copenhagen. And today Paul is going to be talking to you about new model testing, a new test process and tool. If you have any questions for Paul, just type them into the questions field there on your control panel, and then at the end of the webinar we will go through your questions one by one. So now let me hand you over to today's presenter, Paul Gerard. Hello, Paul.
Hi, Dara, and everybody. Thank you. Right. Is that good, Dara?
Perfect, Paul.
Okay, thanks a lot. That's great. Well, firstly, thank you to the EuroSTAR guys for asking me to pitch a webinar. I'm kind of quite excited myself, and by the sound of it, they've got a cast of thousands who've registered for this whole series of webinars, so I'm very pleased with that as well. So without further ado, let me crack on. So what I want to do today is talk, is kind of extend the work that I've been doing with this idea of a new model of testing that I created a year or two ago. And kind of what I'm going to try and share with you today is really some R&D, mostly R rather than D, but what the hell. And kind of just give you a sense of what I've been up to for the past 9 months, I think is probably about the period. I also want to focus your attention on perhaps how you think about your test process, but also how you might improve, given the pressures that we've all been under for the past, I don't know, however many years. Let's say the last 5 years, when the whole testing is dead meme sort of kicked off. We're still not working in a settled environment in that respect. So I think some of the ideas I want to share with you are, I believe, will help in that direction. So I'm also going to explain and show you what I'll call a partial prototype of a tool. Now, whether this evolves into a product, I don't know, but right now it's been helping me to understand better how we should think about testing in collaborative, agile, continuous delivery, DevOps, shift-left environments, all that kind of stuff. I also want to work with people and hear what other people are working on and thinking about in this field, because I know I can't do it on my own. So I'm looking for collaborators for contributions of ideas, certainly, but also some maybe early beta testers of the tool to refine the ideas and maybe refine the tool into something that's viable as a possibly open source, possibly community driven kind of development. Anyway, let me lead on. For the purpose of today, I've painted my agenda as a picture rather than a list of topics. So I'm going to start at the top and talk briefly about test process, then mention some work I did a few months ago on whether robots will replace testers, or rather how robots may support testers. I then want to talk about my kind of journey, if you like, in learning about bots and how they might help us as testers. And I'll describe kind of the architecture of a tool that I hope will support testers in the field. Then I'll give a quick demo and then step back and say, you know what, this affects the test process, and what would this refined test process, this tool supported, this bot supported test process, what might it look like? So I'll come back to test process at the end. So it's kind of a big loop, if you like, in terms of an agenda. So to kick off, I want to just briefly touch on what people would understand as the two, if you like, extreme styles of testing. So on the left, I'm looking at structured, waterfall, staged, and I'm trying to sort of suggest some characteristics of this style of testing. And by and large, people think structured testing, when done well, I should add, it's kind of pretty systematic, it's kind of transparent, well documented, visible to stakeholders. Documents are reviewable. It's also handy for auditing and stuff like that. So by and large, a major goal of structured testing is it's repeatable, measurable, and so on. And by and large, you know, if we have procedures that are very fine at a very fine level of detail, potentially they're automatable as well. And these are kind of positive things about structured waterfall stage testing. Now, if we look at exploratory testing, as it's normally understood, a kind of a freestyle, improvised, imaginative, agile, I'll say with a small a, it's not tied to any particular agile method or anything like that. Exploratory testing is very popular and increasingly popular because it's flexible and more responsive. And in agile teams, most testing tends to be exploratory testing, or it's automated by the developers with maybe some system level automation added for good measure when it's appropriate and possible. And people, by and large, enjoy doing exploratory testing more, I think, than running scripts. I think that's certainly the case, and it's a more humane way of operating, I think, in many respects. But there are also downsides to both sides of the house, if you like. So, you know, one of the motivations for going down the exploratory route in the first place is that scripted testing, let's call it, tends not to be as flexible as we require. It's not very responsive. Documents get out of date very quickly, and we're inevitably working with inaccurate documentation. And it's prone to certain, you know, biases and inattention, stuff like that, and so on and so forth. Unimaginative, maybe boring. So these are kind of characteristics, you know, the good and bad side of structured. But there's also perceptions of exploratory testing, and some of them are real. And as I say with all these things, some of them are real, some of them are perceived, and people's perceptions vary. With exploratory, you know, it's largely not repeatable. It's not designed so much to be repeatable as effective as an open, new, exploratory kind of learning process. Because of that, it's not documented in the same way that you could transfer it directly to test automation, and maybe you wouldn't want to anyway, but it's not perceived to be a good route to automation as opposed to writing sort of detailed test scripts, which is a stepping stone. Documentation tends not to be as visible or required, of course, and the perception is it's kind of harder to manage. It's not hard to manage individuals, but it's harder to manage at scale, one could say, in terms of keeping track of who's doing what and where and why and so on and so forth. It's also kind of opaque. You're completely reliant on the tester to give you a debrief and to explain what they've done and where they've done it and what they've found and so on and so forth. And in that respect, it's much more humane, but as a consequence, because of the documentation issue, it's not so auditable and measurable. It's and there are ways of doing this, but then, and there's a scale, obviously a spectrum of approaches in between these two sides. But anyway, what I want to suggest is this is well understood. We know there are endless variations of approaches, but I want to suggest that underpinning all this is there's if you like, a universal thought process that underpins all types of testing. Now I know that causes it's a cause of some dispute around here, but let me explain that in that the difference between structured and exploratory testing as it's normally described, in my opinion, is one of emphasis and values. So the values of the people doing these things are slightly different, and it's a bit like agile in that it's not that one is better than the other, it's not that one is always better than the other. That's not the case. It's what is appropriate within the context of an organization and its own culture as well. My suggestion is there is an underlying thought process, and what this will become the new model in a second, but what I want to do is, if you haven't heard this talk or heard of the new model before, let me just describe it very quickly. In order to have like a universal thought process, you have to sort of strip away all the debris and detritus and crap that clutters our minds as we do the job we call test. So what I'm going to suggest is, like, for the next minute or two, ignore whether you're going to document your tests or not. I don't care whether we're going to automate our tests or run them manually or anything in between. I don't care what process, whether it's agile, waterfall. I don't care what business you're in. I don't care what technology. If you like, I just want you to clear your mind for a short period, and then whatever is left becomes, I think, the pure thought process of testing. Now, my argument is this. This is the statement of how I think testing actually works. And I'm going to use this word exploratory because and it's slightly different from what you might have experienced in the past. I'm going to say all testing is exploratory. And what we do is this. We explore our sources of knowledge. Our sources of knowledge might be requirements and specifications, documentation, all that kind of stuff. It might be the old system. It might be people we interview or collaborate with in our team. It might be myself and my own knowledge, experience, biases, prejudices, and so on and so forth. It might be the system itself. That's another source. So what we do is we explore all these sources, usually fallible, often incomplete, sometimes conflicting. And we have to make a judgment and build our understanding in some way. I'm going to call that building a test model. So a test model, or a model in general, you could use as a synonym for understanding. We explore our sources, we build our understanding, and when we think we understand enough to test, then we apply a test. So a model might be something as mundane as a flowchart, and if we construct, let's say, a flowchart to describe the behavior of a screen or a system, we can trace paths in the flowchart. So the flowchart doesn't tell us what to test, but it allows us to, it gives us a frame of reference in order to create tests. So paths through a flowchart or state transition diagram, or we might make a list of risks or modes of failure or bugs to check out or whatever. A list is a model in just the same way. We explore our sources, we build models, and then we base our testing on the information in those models. These models might be documented, but very often, certainly when you're doing exploratory testing, they are mental models. They're never shared with anyone. They're just in your head, and you keep them there. So to summarize, the thought process, I think there's two modes of thinking. One is exploring, building our understanding, and the other one is testing. Now, at some point, we think our model is adequate, we understand enough to test, and we create and perform our tests. However it's done, whether it's using tools or manual or whatever, I don't care. But when we test, we often discover that actually our understanding is inadequate, that actually we thought it works this way, but it turns out it works a different way. So we have to flip over, and we find ourselves mostly on the left and then moving over to the right when we're ready, but sometimes we have to go around in circles a little bit and refine our models as we go. And for this, we need judgment. So the judgment is in the middle. Now, on the next page, I'm sorry, before I say that, there's an argument that says that developers think the same way. I actually believe that developers think and model in the same way. Their goal is different in terms of writing code to testers whose goal is to write and run tests or create and run tests. But I think the modeling activity is very similar, and I'm kind of confident in this for my own part is because I am a developer and I cannot separate my thinking about building from testing. The modeling activity in your brain is kind of the same. So there's an argument, I think, for using the new model as a way of, as a foundation for conversations with developers if you are shifting left, if you are working in a development team. So the full model is here, and I'm not going to dwell on it much except to suggest that if you want to know more, there's a video I did for the BBC some time ago, and there's a paper as well. I'm sure the slides will be available, and I know Dara's going to record the session and make the video available, so I won't dwell on that. But that's the full model. There are 10 activities, not 2. Okay. So the model makes no assumption about logistics or context. Okay, and let me suggest this. It's not a process model with entry and exit criteria. So it's not something you could take and then create a process for your team to follow. It's about what's going on in your head. And my belief is that your brain is so good it can work on several of these processes simultaneously. Quite often there are subconscious activities which rationalize and assimilate vast quantities of information. And when you sleep on something, sometimes you wake up much more with a much more clear understanding of some complex situation. So it's about what your brain is doing here and there. It's not a process to be followed or slavishly, whatever. It's just an attempt to understand how we think and the information flows between our exploration on the left and the testing on the right. It also focuses on model making, this idea of understanding and using understanding to derive tests. So my question, which arises from all this and my talk on structured versus waterfall, is it possible to combine the best of structured and exploratory testing to create a new test approach? Now, I'm not going to answer that. I just want to pose that and just say this has been on my mind for, I don't know, 10 years, maybe longer. I don't know. I honestly say. But I've always thought there was a way of taking the best out of both and then try and come up with an alternative way, a third way, if you like. And my belief is, I think it's possible, and my belief is it will help us in very dynamic environments that we seem to be drawn into now, the whole DevOps, continuous, chat ops, all this kind of stuff that's going on now, and shift left, of course. So I want to spend a few minutes, having posed that question, I want to look at, will robots replace testers? And kind of, the answer is, well, no, don't be stupid at one level. But I don't think we should jump to that conclusion too quickly, because I think it's a more sophisticated question, and there's a more sophisticated answer required to answer it. Okay, so there's a paper, again, if you're interested, I wrote about 6 or 8 weeks or so ago, which summarizes the piece of work I did and some conclusions as well. I'm just going to go through that really, really quickly. So whenever I see a recent study, as I always worry that, oh, I'm going to be bombarded with some very spurious data and conclusions. I just want to suggest that right now, every week, there seems to be a new story about robots replacing humans in some career or job or another. I'm not going to dwell on this except to say this summarizes the so-called probabilities of, I think, 702 different occupations for their likelihood of computerizations. So, telesales guys, people are asking set questions and taking answers. I mean, I'm already getting calls from robots, which when the phone rings, you pick up the phone, there's a pause while the robot joins the call, and then it's very hard to recognize that these are robots sometimes, but they clearly are after a while. So telemarketers, 99% likely to be replaced by robots. Recreational therapists, people who work in the care industries, if you like, some respects, some things are automatable, but the whole notion of human contact and care, not likely, even though there is a small percentage, a small likelihood. So I took the 702 occupations and looked at the ones that were sort of systems related, and the tester does not appear in there. Testing is mentioned at the bottom, the inspector, tester, sorters, but these are people working in say a biscuit factory, checking for broken biscuits in a packet, that kind of thing. At that level, sure, testers are going to be replaced by robots, and probably have been already. But an interesting statistic is like programmers. Programmers, the theory is they're almost 50% likely to be replaced over the next, I think it's 10 or 15 years by robots. I mean, I don't know how true that actually is, but the fact there's a number there, the fact the number is not a few percent, but 48%, makes me think there's something happening here, and therefore we should pay attention to this, and should testers pay attention to whether we will be replaced by robots in some way, Now my argument with all this is that actually the tools we have at the moment, the bots we have at the moment, if you like, very broadly called test automation tools, essentially look after test execution automation. And my argument is these are mechanical tools, and these are kind of, certainly in principle, very simple tools. Okay, so my argument, given the new model and where testing fits and test execution fits, I'm going to suggest that our existing test automation library of tools really only fit into 1/10 of the thought process. They do this little piece at the top right called applying. We use tools to apply a test, but the modeling, the interpretation, challenging users and requirements to get requirements better, and so on and so on, making predictions, whatever, these are not automatable right now. Okay, so we are poorly served by the tools industry, and I think I've been saying this, and most people in the conference game and who advocate better thinking in testing, most people would argue that we are not well served by the tools industry, certainly in testing. So if testers need thinking tools, my argument is that actually when it comes to running a check, and I'm happy with that definition, with the James and Michael's definition of checking, I'm happy to use that definition, although less happy about everything else being testing. But a check, in order to create a check, you must have done a certain level of thinking and challenging and modeling and so on for that check to actually be viable. So you cannot create automated tests or checks without having gone through a pretty sophisticated thought process. It's that thought process that we are not well supported in, so we need thinking tools. So kind of to cut a long story short, it's a complicated problem to solve, you know, the whole notion of supporting thinking. So what I've done is, like all consultants, I've created a 4-quadrant model. I apologize profusely. I'm doing a Gartner here, and their magic quadrant, that kind of idea. But what I've done is I've tried to define the tools market or the tools landscape in 2 dimensions. One is the ability of a tool to capture a model, to capture knowledge. And the other dimension, that's going up. And the other, the x-axis horizontal, is the ability to investigate. In fact, to ask intelligent questions, to make judgments on the information gained, and so on and so forth. So kind of obviously, the tools we have, such as they are, and I haven't put any commercial products on that because it's not a well-researched piece of work. This is just an illustration. Things like mind maps, note takers, text editors, that kind of stuff, can capture information for us, but they're not intelligent in any sensible way. Pencil and paper, being almost infinitely flexible, is very high relatively to other tools that people do use, you know, day to day. So, but they have no intelligence at all when it comes to investigation. They cannot ask questions. There might be some scope for UML being very sophisticated and doing kind of cross-checking and validation of integrity, if you like, of a model, but we're pretty poorly served. So there's lots of opportunity to shift right, if you like, with this. I only put that out just to try and illustrate the fact that we are poorly served. So are we going to hit this magic moment when we have, like, you know, the Terminator Tester, the fully automated robot that will investigate, plan, design, run tests, and so on and so forth? I don't think yet. Okay, we're a long way off. However, the opportunity to implement a tool that supports our thinking, I think the opportunity is there, but I think the way it will work is this, that we need to create tools which will capture our thinking, and having done that over a period of time, the potential might be there for AI, deep learning, you know, machine learning tools to analyze that captured information and make some sensible suggestions. But I think that that day is some way off, and we can't have one without the other. I think we have to capture a library of intelligence, if you like, for AI to harvest. So what I want to move on now is kind of where I'm at with programming, if you like, to build a bot that would support modeling and testers. So at one level it's been kind of a 9-month bot journey, but it's also been a 20-year testing, maybe longer, a 20-year testing journey. So some of the thinking I'm trying to bring to bear on this has been around a long time, you know, not just my thinking, but other people's too. So what I'm trying to do is kind of get this on people's agenda now, to think more carefully about how bots might help testers to think and to create and to run and to interpret tests. So my code name for this is Surveyor, and it'll come out in the conversation kind of thing, but I'm using a surveying metaphor to describe how this works. So the vision, if you like, is to have a bot, a partner, a pair, if you like, that could be a person, but could also be a bot, okay, to support exploratory testing. Now, exploratory testing, in the definition I'll use from now on, is as per the new model. So we explore our sources, then we create tests and run them. So exploratory testing is all testing, okay? So can we use, you know, this explore versus test paradigm in a bot? You know, can we do this? So what I want to do is kind of explore. I want to take notes. I want to make a map of the system, a model, if you like. I want to record ideas, observations, identify tests, test ideas, find bugs. I want to do all this kind of stuff that an exploratory tester would do, but I also have one eye on a need to produce documentation to the degree that it will satisfy, for example, an auditor. So what I'm trying to get to is a point where a tester can explore or survey a system, and that process of surveying generates a map. Now, one of the things, if you think back to what explorers do, you know, when people sort of, you know, march into the jungle, find stuff, come back alive, if they went out and said, well, I found a few birds, I found this, I found that, whatever, and then they have no map, they can't reproduce it. So one of the critical deliverables from an exploratory tester, from my perspective, is I want them to contribute to the map. If they're not contributing to the map, they are using the map, one or the other, okay, or refining it if they find errors in it. But the mapping of the system as a model is essential, because that's what we need to hang all the information that we learn through exploration and testing. We need to hang it off that model so we have a we can have a visualization of what we're doing. Okay. So let me just give you a quick rundown of the not the technology, but the kind of the structure, the architecture of it. Top left, I have a website which holds what I've called a schema for the bot. In fact, this is just a state transition model, which is basically the program for the bot itself. Okay, so that's top left. At the bottom, I have my bot client, and it's actually some Python and a module, Python module, which at some point I'll share. But it has two interfaces at the moment. I've got a speech recognition interface and a command line. So I typically use the command line interface for testing, and then drop in the speech recognition to try and make sense of the dialogues with the bot. Now that bot will get its configuration from the schema server, top left, but interact with what I've called the surveyor server through services. And the actions that I want to apply through the bot basically sends a message to the a request to the surveyor server, a web service, to capture new information, to build up a model, and so on and so forth. Now on the surveyor server, there's also a web application, so that what I can do with the bot, I can also mimic or perform, if you like, in a traditional way through a web application. I have to say, none of these things are complete yet. I think the schema server is pretty stable. The surveyor bot is kind of stable, but the schema is still under development. The application on the surveyor server is still under development. So I'm calling this a partial prototype right now. If that's and that's my caveat about the quality of the software. Who am I aiming this at? I'm not really aiming it at what you'd understand as a freestyle exploratory tester working in a two-man team or working on small applications or a product company. I'm not looking at people who are fully exploratory now and trying to give them a tool which will turn them into workers in a regulated, high-integrity, safety-critical environment. That's not the goal. They might find some value in what I'm proposing, and I think they should take a serious look at it. But actually, that's not my target. My target is to try and get people to move from waterfall structured into a more exploratory, improvisational kind of world, if you like. So my target tester is probably one who's working in a documentation-heavy, structured waterfall environment, a traditional, if you like, tester, if you like. So, okay, moving on. So the schema itself for the bot, this is lifted straight out of the robot schema kind of website. I won't dwell on this except to give you a simplified version. The structure of the process from the perspective of the tester is I have like a home on the left. Most work is done through sessions, and through that session I will do modeling. I will map out the architecture of the system and the test. As we move to the right, I will use navigation to actually place myself on the map that I've created, and from there I can create and run tests. So if you like, there's definitely a two-stage process here, one of modeling and one of learning, observing. I'm not saying follow in a staged way, but you have to have a map before you can start, you have to model a feature before you can test and demonstrate some stuff to you. And I have my script. So, okay, so what about my development website? So some things that are So you log in. So I'm going to show you some things that will give you a flavor for how it works. So I've got a thing called NOP Commerce, which is a activity. I've got a charter called Initial Specification Utilizations to go where no man has gone before. Okay, it's a bit of fun, but my charter would have quite explicit goals. Okay. Now, if you like, what I'm going to do is, having chosen that charter, I'm now going to go to my bot. Now, my bot is a Python program and a whole series of modules. So let me just run it. Okay, so this is the voice-controlled bot. So what I have to tell you is the voice recognition is done by Google. So when I speak to the bot sends a message to Google, gets the translation, gets the text back, and then uses that text to implement the commands I'm giving it. I have to tell you, it's quite slow. And I can demonstrate where the speed is lacking in a moment. But it's not the bot that's slow, it's the translation of the voice. So let me log in before I do anything else. And the arrangement I've got here is I'm working from home, and it's the sound of the bot, when you hear it, is coming out of a speaker, and then it's being picked up by my microphone and headset. So let's see. Get my password right.
Welcome to my world. Go ahead, make my day. This is Surveyor. Server, a tester support tool.
Now I'm just going to talk to, not the bot, although the bot's listening, it's going to try and interpret what I'm saying, and you'll see things appear and it will interrupt me in a moment. But by and large, the bot is listening for very specific commands. It's very limited in its vocabulary, if you like. So it's a bit of an artificial process. I should also say it can't say the word surveyor because it's not a real word. So the surveyor is a little bit of a gimmick.
I'm just going to talk to not the boss of a box listening. It's going to try and interpret what I'm saying, and you'll see things appear and it will interrupt me in a moment, but by and large the boss is listening for very specific commands, very limited in its vocabulary, if you like, so it's a bit of an artificial process. I should also say it can't say the word surveyor because they are. Home commands are start, settings, show, variables, memory, charter. This is Surveyor. Server, a tester support tool.
Start.
Start. OK. Session resumed. In session.
Charter.
Charter. Place not selected, feature not selected, form not selected, field not selected. Session elapsed time is 10 seconds. OK. Paul, this is your charter status. Your default application is NOP Commerce. Your current session is titled Initial Survey of the Application. The goal of the charter is scope out the application. To visit new worlds. To seek out new civilizations. To go where no man has gone before. In session.
Place.
Place. OK. 15 found. Select place to visit.
2. Okay, so if you're still with me, you can see that the translation, the voice translation is all this.
What are you thinking about?
Yeah, yes, indeed.
There is a problem with the listener.
Okay, I'm going to kill it off, and I'm going to use the command line instead, briefly, which I call ThinkBot, and I will log in again. So now you won't hear a voice, but you'll see it on the text. So if I say start, okay, charter, that's the charter description. I need to locate what I'm going to do. So I'll say place 2, I happen to know the second one of this, admin module, feature. There are 2 features. One is login process, form, login form, field, and there are 6 fields. I don't know if you can see that clearly, but the fields are like my login status is kind of an implicit field, username, password, OK button, cancel, and a message, which is an output field, okay, an output. So I'm going to kill this now because what I want to do is actually show you on the web application. But in principle, everything you can do on the web application you can do through the bot, but it's easier to demonstrate it through the screens. So if I start the session, going back to the application itself, okay, I have it called Explorer, and I didn't explain this, but there's a hierarchy of location. So I have places, so I'm going to look at the admin module, and beneath that I've got a login process, login processes, I've got a login form, and then this data here refers to the fields on that form. So for places, features, and forms, I have a series of buttons. So I can edit a place, I can add some notes based on that place and for that place. I can make an observation, log a bug, a question, a query if you like for someone to answer. I can add a place, and I can also change a selection using this button. So I can change my selection. And that applies to all fields as well. So I have these same 3 buttons. So it looks a little bit like a cash register with all these damn buttons, but it's all in one place. So I can add fields and reorder fields as well, because the order might be significant. So let me show you the session log. So I was doing some stuff this morning. So this morning you can see I've been starting session, resume session, updating fields, updating tests, running tests, and so on and so forth. So there's a log right across the board for all this. We've got a test summary. So for that form, I've got a series of tests, and if I show you, if I edit one, let me just look at this. And I can't spend much time on this because I'm limited by time, but you can see that I have for a test, I have an entry point to get to that form. I have a series of values, and these have, if I delete that, this is the email address or the account username. There are some suggested values here. Well, these values come from when I edit the field and create the field originally. These are test values that I added to the field when I created that field for the form. It wouldn't be added when I used the bot because it's probably too clumsy to try and speak your way through all this. But when you come back to when you finish your session, if there's any tidying up of the session information, you do it through the application itself. Okay. So the interesting thing here is if there's a convention now where if a value has no stars, so that there, it's been used in a test and that test has been run. If it has 1 star, it's been used in a test. If it has 2 stars, it doesn't appear in any tests and it's never been run. Okay, so I always aim to be picking out these values with 2 stars to build up my test area. Okay, I can add more outcomes, whatever. Let me go back to test summary. So if I want to run a test, and let me run one that's already been run as an example. bit slow. Suddenly. This is the risk with all demonstrations, that you have a delay. There we go. So this is the test definition: entry point, test values, expected outcomes. And I can say if I see different outcomes, I can record those. This is what to look at. This is what I see. I have an interpretation. But if the test runs okay, I can just, passed okay, submit. So I just need to click one button to say the test has run, and I've run it again. And that will appear in the log now as another run. So these tests are, if you like, unit level for the back of an executable transactions, if you like. It could be services. I can't dwell on that, but I can, at the moment, you'll have to use your imagination, but the same mechanism can be used to describe the testing of services. Okay, so I want to go back to the home page. I want to show you something. So as I create the model of the application, if you like, the map, what I get is it's kind of a hierarchy. So at the top level, I've got NLP Commerce, which is the application. These are places that I've defined, within the application. I know sales is one. That's got a feature called orders. There's one form on that page, and then these are the fields on that page. So I can navigate through, if you like, a hierarchy, and you could probably project this as a mind map in the same way, but ultimately it's a hierarchy. So how you choose that hierarchy is quite important. The other thing I want to mention is the fact that the whole goal of capturing the data in that format is to make much better use of some of the fantastic kind of visualizations that you can now get. These are all open source. This is a thing called D3, data-driven documents. So, for example, a zoomable tree map, what I want to do is present people with a map of the system they're testing that they can navigate from and through. And when they look into like a room in the map, they can see which tester is working in there. So if you're the tester, then the tool will know who is working in your vicinity. So perhaps you should talk to each other. Perhaps there's an integration I've got with Slack, like a ChatOps application. So you can actually integrate instant messaging with your testing, so your testing know exactly who's doing what and where and why, and also the record of their observations and their questions and their queries. So if you have to go over some ground that one of your colleagues has done, you are fully informed. So it's a bit like visiting a patient. The first thing you do, like a doctor, when he visits a patient in a hospital, the first thing you do is look at the patient notes. In the same way, we can look at the notes for the place, feature, form, or field that you're looking at in particular. So what I want to try and get people to think about is the opportunity is there to have much better visualizations of what they do as testers. And with that, I'll close that work down. Okay, so back to the slide. Oh, I should have, I think it was on about 25. Sorry about this. There we go. Right. So I didn't mention, I should have showed you this before I did the demo, but there's this location hierarchy. It's up to you how you structure that. That's what I've just shown you. So what does this mean? So if we are capturing information as explorers to map out the territory that we're going to test, and we're going to use that as the basis for reporting and visualizations later on, how does that affect the process? Well, one of the things I want to suggest is that of all those companies that are offshoring and outsourcing their testing to huge teams, in the subcontinent or anywhere, quite often there's satisfaction with the way they're working in that they do exactly as they're told. They do a good job. But there's dissatisfaction and frustration because they might not be innovative. They're not very exploratory. They're not using tools in a systematic way. And essentially they're not incented to do a better job because by and large you pay them by the day, by the week, by the hour, whatever. So one of my goals is to try and suggest a new process that will help companies to have a more effective and efficient process to allow the human beings in these teams to use their faculties in a much more sophisticated way. So we know exploratory testing is more productive than scripted, okay? But can we use this idea of a surveying metaphor to simplify the process? So this is a kind of very simple schematic, but if we are shifting left and we're moving from stage to continuous, At the top, you can see kind of a traditional kind of sequence of events for the testers. But below, what we might say is, when development starts, our testers who are embedded in the development team can start exploring. They can start capturing the map and the models for the system. And that continues throughout development. As they proceed, they need clarification. So the feedback to developers, to users, to stakeholders who are defining requirements, we need clarification very often. So this is part of the exploration process, to get clarification. It's part of the new model, that feedback loop. As we learn more and as features become available, we can start testing them. So whether these are done by tools or by people, certainly the test sessions that are done by people in an exploratory fashion, that's continuous throughout the delivery. But in parallel with that, as opportunities arise to automate these tests, we take those opportunities and build them into either unit tests the developers would be looking after, or system level tests, and build them into continuous integration. So the process is kind of continuous development, test and delivery. The process is geared towards taking best advantage of tools as early as possible. So automation doesn't happen at the end after all the manual testing is done. It's almost instantaneous. As soon as something can be automated, it is automated as a test, as a check, and so on. Okay. So what happens to the process? So, well, if we're capturing the data of the architecture of the system and test values for the fields within forms, within features, within places in the system, we have most of the information required to actually create a test plan. So my argument is that if we're creating tests at a low level, as those features become available, our test plan, like the system itself, is emergent. It emerges through the learning process of development. So if you like, rather than testing being completely at odds with the development and the developers and the users and the stakeholders and business analysts and so on, we're actually, by being embedded and by using a survey kind of metaphor to capture this information, we're actually working on the same timescales, the same cadence as the rest of our team. Now, one of the other things that becomes possible is once you have that as a consideration, we know our map is growing day by day, our system model is growing day by day, the tests that are being run, that the library is growing day to day, the log of tests activity is growing day by day. We can also do real-time test management. We can see what our testers are actually doing day by day. We can control at a very low level through charters exactly where they pay attention. We can also, during the test process itself, while people are actually exploring and testing, developers can see what's going on too, and testers can also see each other's activity and liaise when necessary. And we can hook up the test process with chat ops and DevOps through, for example, Slack. And I've already built an integration there to actually do that. So Slack sees messages when testers start and end test sessions and when they run tests. So that's all very straightforward to create. So I think the opportunity is there is to have to manage testing in a real-time way, in an improvisational way, if you like, in alignment with how developers work and how testers who explore work too. The process of moving from stage to continuous, I'm not going to dwell on how that happens and how easy or difficult it is. I'm not saying it's easy, of course not. But the aim of the testers should be to export the content of tests as soon as possible to some tool for the tool to pick it up. So the whole idea of doing this in this way is not to have a big automation process at the end, but rather to have an emergent test automation process. Now, if I took the best of both worlds, a structured waterfall and exploratory testing, I think it is possible to bring those two together. I think it is possible to have an improvisational and an imaginative test team working to create very systematic maps of the applications under test, to have something that's reviewable and auditable, repeatable, measurable, and automatable. So my goal, I think, is kind of not in reach, but I think it's viable. So what I'm trying to suggest is we should be looking for processes and tools that support a surveying metaphor in a team of scale, that we should have a more exploratory process. So that's kind of the end of what I want to talk about. If you're interested in anything I've said and you want to know more, do let me know. I'm actually looking to work with a relatively small number of people to collaborate on ideas for taking this further, but obviously also maybe a client or two who are prepared to alpha or beta test the whole idea and see whether we can work further to make it achievable. I think, Dara, at that point I'm kind of done. I'm ready for Q&A, or a Q and maybe some A. We'll see.
Thank you very much, Paul, for that presentation. It's very interesting altogether. And as Paul mentioned, we'll be looking at the Q&A session now very, very shortly. So if you haven't already typed your questions for Paul, please do so now. Before we get to the Q&A, I just want to mention as well that we have 4 other webinars taking place this week. So tomorrow we'll have a webinar with Simon Stewart, and he will be looking at the brand new release of Selenium 3.0. He'll be looking through how what the new update entails and what we can expect from Selenium 4 and so on. We also have James and John Bach coming in to talk about thinking through your role on Thursday. And on Friday, we'll have 2 webinars, the first being with Hybe Shoots, looking at practical test strategy using heuristics. And then the final webinar in the series will be Testing Cloud Native Applications with Penny Resnick. Next week, next Friday, is the deadline for the EuroSTAR Early Bird, where you can get a 10% discount on your ticket. And if you'd like to find out more information about the ticket options, you can see the link there below. We also have another ticket option that is 4 tickets. If you buy 4 tickets, you will get 1 ticket free. So that's 5 tickets for the cost of 4, and that applies beyond the early bird discount. That's available all year round. So there's a number of different links I mentioned just there. So I'm just going to share those links with you guys now, and in your chat box you should see them all here. Okay, so let's have a look at some of the questions that have come through for you here, Paul.
Okay.
And as well, thank you all very much for posting your questions. So I'll just open up my questions tab here. The first question that's jumping out at me here is asking, do you believe that the point of testing is to find bugs, or to answer the question, does the system do what we need it to do, or both?
I definitely believe that testing should not focus only on bugs. I know it's a common thing, and going way back to Glenn Myers, saying the goal of testing is to locate defects, I think was the way he put it, or locate errors as he called them. If you limit yourself to only that, I think there's a very good chance you will be regarded as the servant of the developers. Because ultimately, although everyone's interested in bugs and eliminating them, it's your day-to-day relationship is with the developers. And so if all you ever do is say, well, I find bugs and that's my job, the risk is that the developers will treat you like servants. So I think we have to look bigger and higher, if you like, at what our goals are. Our goals are, we are an information provision service, and we provide information to our stakeholders, one of whom is the developer. But our stakeholders are also the project manager, end users, and user management, and so on and so forth. We have to provide evidence of failure for bugs to be fixed, of course, but we must also provide evidence of things working to give people confidence that they are getting what they want out of the system. And it extends right from low-level pieces of code up to, can the system collect money? Can it make money? Can it deliver products? Can it deliver a good experience? All these things are incredibly important to our stakeholders, and we should be aiming to provide evidence on all. So the answer is both. Perhaps I should have just said both.
It was a funny one to get things started, all right. The next question here asks, can the models also be created out of the Surveyor bot?
Yes. So what I didn't show you, because the response of, I'm going to blame Google for the response time of the voice control. But what I didn't show you is how you build up the model. So you can create places, and having created a place, you're regarded as being in that place, and then when you create a feature, it sits in the hierarchy underneath that place. And when you create a form, it sits under that feature, and when you create a field, it sits within the context of a form. So right now, you can create that hierarchy of places, hierarchy of locations in the system using the bot. You can't use the bot yet to run tests, but that is not a hard thing. What I wanted to do, just to explain why that's the case, is when I started all this about 5-6 months ago, right, actually building stuff, I had, I think I had like 5 moving parts. You know, I had the Schema server, I had the Schema, I have the bot, I've got the services on this, what's become the Surveyor site, and then the management utilities, the web application itself. So I had 5 moving parts, and so I had to start moving things around in terms of getting things to work in parallel. So right now I've been working much more on the web application itself to make it possible to use the web application, but everything the web application can do, I hope ultimately the bot will do as well. But that depends on the schema that I have to design in order for the bot to interact with a human in the right way. So it's a kind of a complicated process, I have to say. I'd say in terms of the web application, there's probably, I mean, ultimately, if it's a product, it's probably about 50% there. You know, it can do some clever things now, but as a comprehensive, marketable product, there's a long way to go. With the bot, the bot itself works exactly as it should do. It's the schema and the services that support the bot that need development there, and that's the way behind. But kind of I'm using the web application to prototype the functionality, and then the bot will follow behind and implement it through its pathway. So again, it's a long answer. I'm sorry, it's not a simple yes/no answer. Okay.
The next question here asks, did you say that exploratory testing is more productive than test cases that are scripted? If so, can you explain why?
Well, if you think about it, that's really, I mean, what you might do is go to Ken Kaner's website. He's got some very good resources on explaining how exploratory testing works. I think it's his exploratory testing class. If you Google Kaner exploratory testing, you'll see a PDF to some slides, which I actually looked at this morning, which have a good explanation. But in summary, the way to think about it is this: is that if you strip away all the documentation, process, all the logistical stuff, you end up with the pure thought process, which is what I'm trying to suggest is what the new model is giving you. And that would be the ultimate, speedy process of testing. But you wouldn't be doing any testing because it doesn't cover execution and the mechanics of testing. If you add process to that, like, well, we have to document all our tests before we run our tests, that will add an overhead. So in the simplest case, this is the simplest example, if I have to document stuff before I do it, whereas in exploratory testing I just do it and give some kind of feedback afterwards, that is going to cost more. Now, you get other value out of it. So when I say exploratory testing is more efficient or effective, what I'm really trying to say is you're taking less time to get to the point where you run a test and interpret the outcome. However, forward, and what exploratory testing is better than scripted testing, or scripted testing is more reliable, systematic, all those other buzzwords I showed you on the slides. I want to get away from that and say, well, what can we do which will take the benefits of improvisation and exploration and the benefits of transparency, auditability and visibility? Can we get those values into the same test process. That's what I'm trying to do. So I kind of don't want to get into a bun fight about which is best and which is worse and more effective and appropriate. We know where these things are appropriate and where they're not appropriate. I think that's understood. I'm trying to come up with a kind of a, I don't want to say a middle ground or a compromise. I want to say a third way that just take the best of both approaches and delivers what people on the waterfall structured side want to get, and delivers the efficiencies and effectiveness and the, if you like, fulfillment, for the testers who are involved. You can actually spend your time being smart rather than spending your time doing documentation and the boring stuff. Again, I don't think I can do short answers on that one.
Another question asks here, Paul, can you map out things that are not features? For example, can you map out ways to interact with the features?
Can you map out ways to interact with the features? So kind of what's missing from the model is, if you like, I think I could interpret that question in three different ways, but let me take one interpretation. What's missing from the tests, as I showed you very quickly, there is no procedure. So you could say, hold on, what I'm showing you are actually test cases, not a procedure with step-by-step, do this, do that, do the other, watch this, watch that. And my argument would be this: if you are embedded and you've shifted left and you are in the development team so that you see the delivered software as early as can be, and you are spending time exploring it, you will know it inside out very quickly. So it's true that if you don't document a procedure, you might enter data into a screen in a different order, but implicitly perform the same test case, but you could regard it as a different test. So you could say that's a gap, but I would say if it's important that you enter data in a certain sequence, for example, if this is what you're actually asking, if it's important you enter data in a certain sequence, I think there's probably, you could capture a note against the test or capture a note against the form itself to say there are various ways of doing this. So for example, you might use just the keyboard and not the mouse at all to actually enter data. Or you might use the mouse to do all the navigation and the moving between fields and jumping between fields in a different order. These are things that might be important in your application. So I'd say that would be a refinement to what I've got, but not part of the model, if that makes sense. So that would be a refinement to add to what I've got, and certainly that would be an idea I'd encourage a lot more of that kind of challenge, so that I can think about it and maybe come up with a proposal on it. So I appreciate that I'm not capturing the entirety of what you need to be concerned with, but I've tried really to stick with, like, if you like, the data and a presumed sequence of fields from start to finish in your testing. I haven't provided a procedure which might give you that kind of level of detail. It could be added, I suppose, but I'm kind of trying to avoid procedures because for the quantity of paperwork you create and the value they add, it's limited. So I think rather than a procedure, maybe there's some kind of sidebar for the test that the robot would advise you of, to say, by the way, you should run this test in this way. Maybe that's the way to think of it.
Okay, and we've gone way over time, but there's still lots of questions, and a lot of people are still hanging around. So maybe we might take just one or two more, if that's all right.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy with that.
There's a question here which asks, would one of the ultimate goals be for the bot to create a map from integration of the requirements?
Now this is interesting, isn't it? What I didn't say was if I'm in a if I'm in a project where it's a waterfall project, structured, call it what you like, there's a big set of requirements, there is no reason why you couldn't build the model out of those requirements. I would caution, though, and I put a caveat on that. So what you could say is, okay, I've got 2 months, a 2-month period where I can take the requirements or the specification or design or whatever it is, and build the model from that. Now the risk of that is that the requirements are wrong, so when the real software arrives and there's a mismatch, you have to sort of tidy up the document, or you have to tidy up the model, of course. But in actual fact, if that was the case, you'd be in, again, in my belief that it suits an embedded or a shift-left approach. When the developers start looking seriously at the requirements and start making decisions on structure and design and stuff like that, which does not match the requirement, there's clearly a role for the tester is to try and flag that and say, well, okay, how does that affect how we test? How does that affect what we deliver to the customer? But the thing is, if you are structuring, if you are creating or speculating on tests on a model which turns out to be incorrect, I think the lessons that will be learned by the developers are almost certainly, some of them almost certainly will be learned by the testers earlier on. So in actual fact, you'll have a mechanism for challenging those requirements and saying, well, you seem to have created 3 features with almost identical functionality. Maybe you should combine them into one feature that's a bit more flexible. I don't know, I'm guessing, it's a suggestion. I think there's nothing stopping you creating the model from requirements and then refining it when you see the system delivered. And those refinements would be triggers for a little notification to the author of the requirements and maybe the users to say what you asked for has not been implemented the way you expected. So again, the tester's doing a good job by raising these discrepancies. So the answer is yes, you could build a model from documentation rather than the system itself. I think you would choose to do part or all of your model from requirements depending on your project. There might be areas where you say, we'll wait for the software to arrive before we get into that level of detail because the requirements are vague. Okay, so, and that's common enough, isn't it? I hope that kind of answers. But you don't have to just wait for the system. It's certainly the response.
And finally, Paul, just to wrap it up here, when will Surveyor be available?
Good question. So one of the things I need to think about is, I've got a small team working offshore as it happens who will help me, but it might be more effective to build a project and get some investment to do it. I'm open to suggestion. It might be a small investment, it might be a huge investment. If someone says, you know what, this could transform the whole world of testing, and I'll invest. I think the most productive way I can think of making this happen is to work with a small number of clients who are prepared to trial it and maybe adopt it as it evolves and emerges in line with their expectations. How long will that take? I'd be hopeful that if I did this talk in a year's time, I'd have something pretty concrete to talk about. So I think less than a year. I think I'll be able to get quite a lot of the functionality together to make it viable, a minimum viable product, if you like, by the end of this year, certainly. So that's kind of my guess at timescales. 6 months for something that you could experiment with, and maybe a year for something you could use in anger, I'm guessing.
All right, great. Thank you very much, Paul, for taking the time out today for this really interesting presentation. And I'd also like to thank all of our attendees who were here today and all of your questions. Unfortunately, we didn't get time to go through every one of your questions, but I'll pass on the questions to Paul and we'll get the answers for you. We'll put them up on the Test Huddle website. On Test Huddle as well, you'll be able to get you'll be able to access the recording of this webinar, and you can look at the webinar slides. That's all from us here today, and we hope to see you all at the other webinars we have taking place during this week. Thank you all, and take care.